My name is Lauren Bennett. I am 34 years old. The moment my family took the stage at the annual company gala and claimed my years of research as my brother's breakthrough, the betrayal sliced through me like nothing else ever had. My mother laughed quietly under the applause, while my father shook his head in disappointment, their actions making it clear I was the one who didn't belong. I stood frozen as my years of work vanished in front of the crowd, but I refused to stay silent. I stepped forward and asked for the original data right then and there. That single bold question I asked was going to force the truth out no matter what it cost. Looking back now as I sit here telling you all this story, I can still remember exactly how the lights from that ballroom in downtown Denver felt on my skin. That night, warm and blinding at the same time. The whole evening had been billed as a celebration of the family business, hitting a new milestone, but for me, it turned into the moment I realized my own identity had been quietly erased over the course of years. My mother, Margaret Bennett, stood there, clapping along with everyone else, as if the neural feedback program I had spent 7 years developing was something my brother had dreamed up all on his own. My father, Robert Bennett, simply nodded in that way he always did when he wanted to keep the peace and protect the family image above everything else. I had poured late nights and every bit of my expertise into creating something that could genuinely help people dealing with trauma. And in one polished presentation, it was all being handed over like it had never been mine. The shock of hearing my brother's name attached to my work hit me so hard that for a second, the room seemed to tilt. I had left the university lab years earlier because the pressure to fit the family mold had become too much. But I kept working quietly on my own because I believed in the research. My brother Tyler Bennett had always been the one they pushed into the spotlight with funding and connections, while I stayed in the background supporting from the shadows. That night at the gala, I finally saw how far they were willing to go to keep that dynamic alive. When I raised my voice to ask for the original source data in front of the entire crowd, the silence that fell was thick enough to cut with a knife. My mother turned toward me with that calm smile she wore like armor and said, "Lauren, darling, this is hardly the place for your little interruptions. Let your brother have his moment for the family." Her words landed like a slap, laced with that familiar sarcasm that always made me feel small. My father just stood there, shaking his head again, his silence louder than any shout, while my brother smirked from the podium, as if the whole thing was a minor inconvenience. Security started moving in my direction, but before they could reach me, my Aunt Vivian Carter, who had helped organize the entire event, grabbed my elbow and pulled me toward the side exit. "Sweetheart, you are embarrassing everyone," she whispered sharply. "Some things are better left in the family. Stop making this about you." Her tone carried the same cutting edge my mother always used, and in that moment, I realized my aunt had known about the credit theft all along and had chosen to help bury it. I managed to slip away from the gala without causing a bigger scene, but the weight of what had just happened pressed on my chest the entire drive home through the quiet Denver streets. The next morning, my research partner, Rachel Thompson, called me before I even had coffee in hand. She had been at the event too and had watched the whole thing unfold. "Lauren, I still have copies of your original timestamps and notes from when we collaborated in the lab," she told me, her voice steady but worried. "We can prove this was yours. Don't let them do this to you." Her support felt like the first real lifeline in months, but it also made me see how the family's reach was already spreading to the people around me. Later that afternoon, I met with my former mentor, Dr. Philip Grant, at a small cafe near the old university campus. He had watched me develop the early prototypes and had always encouraged me to keep going, even when the family pressure grew heavy. "Your father approached me 6 months ago, asking me to sign off on a credit transfer," he said quietly over his coffee. "I refused, but they found someone else willing to look the other way. This wasn't an accident, Lauren. They planned it. Hearing that confirmation from someone I trusted made the betrayal feel even heavier, like the ground beneath me was shifting. I left the cafe with my mind racing, clutching the folder of old emails and data logs he had slipped me. As I walked to my car, I noticed a dark SUV parked across the street, with its engine-running windows tinted, and something about the way it lingered made the hairs on my arms stand up. I told myself it was paranoia, but the feeling stayed with me the rest of the day. That evening, my cousin Marcus Carter, who sat on the family business board, sent me a message that made my stomach drop. Cousin, the board is offering a quiet settlement if you sign over the rights and stop asking questions. Don't force us to make this public and ugly. Think about what's best for everyone. His words carried the same tone of quiet threat that my mother always used, and I realized he had been part of the planning from the start, even though he had once pretended to be on my side. The pressure was closing in faster than I expected, and I could feel the family circling to protect their version of events. I spent the next few days quietly gathering more proof, meeting Rachel at her office after hours to copy files she had kept safe. She looked exhausted when she handed them over. They already called my boss, offering her a deal if she kept me quiet. She admitted, "I'm with you, but this is getting scary." That confession added another layer of worry because I never wanted my fight to drag her down with me. If you have ever had your own family try to erase everything you worked for and make you feel like you never mattered, tell me in the comments, because I really need to know. I am not the only one who has felt this invisible. What they did next to try and cut off every support I had left almost made me wonder if walking away was the only choice I had. The following week, I finally sat down with my attorney, Jonathan Hale, in his downtown office. He listened carefully as I laid out the timeline and showed him the files. "This looks like clear intellectual property theft," he said, his tone professional but concerned. "We can file a claim, but your family's connections in the business community mean they will fight dirty. Are you ready for that kind of battle?" I told him I was, even though inside I was already feeling the cracks forming. That same night, my mother called me at home, her voice smooth as silk, but edged with steel. "Lauren, darling, why are you dragging everyone through this mess? Your brother has built something wonderful for the company. You always were the one who made everything so difficult." Her words stung because they carried the same old message that my contributions were never enough unless they served the family image. I hung up feeling drained, but I kept pushing forward, meeting Dr. Philip Grant again to review more old correspondence that proved the work had been mine from the beginning. The tension kept rising in ways I could not ignore. Rachel texted me one afternoon saying someone from the company had shown up at her lab, asking questions about my files. My cousin Marcus left another message, warning that if I continued, the family would have no choice but to protect its interests in public. The black SUV I had noticed earlier started appearing near my apartment building in the evenings, always parked just far enough away to make me question if I was imagining it. One night, I stepped outside to check, and it pulled away slowly, headlights cutting through the darkness like a warning. That moment left me standing on the sidewalk, with my heart pounding, realizing the family was not going to let me reclaim what was mine without a fight that could cost me everything I had left. The next morning, the pressure from my family started closing in even tighter than I had feared, and every new call or message felt like another door slamming shut on the life I had tried to build for myself. My mother rang first thing, her voice carrying that same polished calm she always used when she wanted to remind me exactly where I stood in the family hierarchy. "Lauren, darling, your little outburst at the gala has already reached the board members, and they are not amused," she said smoothly, as if she were discussing the weather instead of my entire career being dismantled. We all agreed this would be Tyler's moment to shine for the company's future. Why must you always turn everything into a personal war?" Her words sliced right through the quiet of my kitchen, laced with that familiar sarcasm that made me feel like the perpetual problem child no matter how hard I worked. I tried to keep my tone even when I answered, but inside, I could feel the old resentment rising because this was the same woman who had quietly signed off on every credit shift behind the scenes for years. Before I could even finish my coffee, my brother Tyler showed up at my apartment unannounced, his usual confident stride filling the doorway like he owned the place. "Come on, sis. You know how this works," he said with a sharp little laugh that didn't reach his eyes. "The neural program is bigger than any one of us now. The investors want a face they recognize. And let's be honest, mine sells the story better than yours ever could." He leaned against the counter, arms crossed, delivering the jab with the same casual cruelty my mother had perfected over decades. I reminded him that the original data logs still carried my timestamps from the very first prototype, but he just shrugged and told me the board had already rebranded everything under the company name. Mom and Dad made the call weeks ago. He added, his voice dropping to that low warning tone. "Walk away now, and we can still make this a family success instead of a messy footnote." The way he phrased it made it clear the entire family had been in on the plan long before the gala lights came up, and hearing it straight from him left a cold knot in my stomach that refused to loosen. That same afternoon, my Aunt Vivian called from the event planning office she ran for the company, her words coming fast and laced with the same family loyalty that always masked real threats. "Sweetheart, I've already smoothed things over with 3 major donors who saw your little scene," she said, her tone dripping with false concern. "But if you keep pushing this, the board will have no choice but to release statements about your past instability. Think about your reputation, not just your ego." The sarcasm in her voice mirrored my mother's exactly, and I realized then that my aunt had been feeding them information about my quiet lab work for months. I hung up feeling more isolated than ever because the people who were supposed to have my back were the very ones sharpening the knives. Later that evening, Rachel met me at a quiet coffee shop on the edge of downtown Denver, her hands shaking slightly as she slid another flash drive across the table. "They visited my lab this morning," she whispered, glancing over her shoulder. "Some suit from the company offered my boss a big consulting contract if she made sure I stayed quiet about the original files." I said no, but Lauren, "They're not playing around anymore." Her fear was real, and it hit me hard because I had never wanted my fight to pull her into the crossfire yet. Here we were watching the family's reach stretch further than I had imagined possible. My attorney Jonathan called right after I got home that night, his voice steady but carrying a new edge of caution. "The family's legal team just filed a preemptive motion claiming you signed over rights years ago," he explained. "They're using old foundation paperwork your mother apparently handled. We can fight it, but it's going to get expensive and ugly fast." The news landed like another quiet betrayal because I knew my mother had been the one quietly moving documents around for years, while pretending everything was for the greater good of the company. I spent the rest of the evening reviewing every old email Dr. Philip Grant had given me, trying to build a timeline that could hold up. But the weight of it all started pressing down harder with each passing hour. The black SUV appeared again outside my building around midnight engine, idling just long enough to make sure I noticed it from the window. This time, it didn't drive away quickly. It sat there until I finally turned off the lights, leaving me lying awake wondering how far my family was willing to go to keep their version of the story intact. 2 days later, the real escalation hit when my cousin Marcus showed up at my workplace during my lunch break, his smile tight and his words chosen like weapons. "The board voted this morning," he said quietly, while we stood in the hallway of the research center where I still consulted part-time. "If you don't drop the claim by Friday, they'll release a statement about your mental health struggles after you left the university." Mom already approved the wording. The jab carried the same psychological edge my mother always used, and hearing him echo her exact phrasing made it crystal clear that the entire family had circled the wagons to protect Tyler's spotlight at my expense. I told him I had proof that would expose everything, but he just laughed softly and reminded me that public perception always favored the ones holding the purse strings. "You've always been the smart one in private," he added with that cutting sarcasm, but publicly, the family narrative wins every time. Walking back to my desk after he left, I could feel colleagues glancing at me sideways already, as if the whispers had started spreading through the building before the day even ended. That evening, my mother sent a certified letter through a courier that arrived at my door, just as the sun was setting the envelope heavy with the kind of finality that made my hands shake when I opened it. Inside was a formal offer to settle quietly for a small consulting fee and a promise to never speak about the program again, signed by both my parents and my brother. "This is your chance to come back into the fold where you belong," the note attached read in my mother's elegant handwriting. "Don't throw away everything we built together over something as silly as credit." The sarcasm jumped off the page, and I could hear her voice saying it in my head, that same tone she had used at the gala to dismiss me in front of everyone. I sat there staring at the papers for a long time, feeling the pull of the old family pressure trying to drag me back into silence. But something inside me refused to fold, even as the threats kept mounting. Rachel texted me later that night saying her boss had been offered a promotion tied to keeping her quiet, and the worry in her message added another layer of guilt I hadn't asked for. The SUV was back again by 10 o'clock, parked closer this time, its presence turning my quiet apartment into a space that no longer felt safe. I barely slept after that. The combination of my mother's letter and the constant surveillance leaving me replaying every conversation in my head until the early hours. When dawn finally broke, I knew I had to make a choice before the family's next move landed, because the pressure was building towards something I might not be able to walk away from unscathed. My phone buzzed on the nightstand just as I was pouring coffee, and when I checked the screen, the message from an unknown number made my blood run cold. It simply read, "Last warning from the board. Drop it or watch everything you care about disappear." No signature, but I knew exactly whose influence lay behind those words, and the realization that my family had escalated to anonymous threats left me standing frozen in my kitchen, wondering how much more I could lose before this fight broke me completely. The anonymous message left me standing frozen in my kitchen, wondering how much more I could lose before this fight broke me completely. I barely had time to process it before my phone rang again, this time with my mother on the line, her voice as smooth and controlled as ever, but carrying that familiar edge that always made me feel like I was the one disrupting the perfect family picture. "Lauren, we need to talk as a family tomorrow evening at the house," she said, without any greeting. "Your father and I have arranged everything, and your brother will be there too. It's time we put an end to this nonsense before it damages the company any further." Her words weren't a request. They were a command, wrapped in that polished sarcasm she had used my whole life to keep me in line. I agreed because refusing felt pointless at that point, but inside, I could feel the walls closing in tighter than ever. The next evening, I drove to my parents' large suburban home on the outskirts of Denver, the same place where I had once spent weekends helping my father with early business plans before everything shifted to favor my brother. When I walked in, the living room was already set up like a quiet board meeting, with my aunt and cousin seated on one side, and my father standing by the fireplace, looking as disappointed as he had at the gala. My mother took the lead immediately, as she always did, gesturing for me to sit while she poured herself a glass of wine. "We all know why we're here," she began, her tone laced with that cutting precision. You've been causing unnecessary trouble over something that belongs to the family now. Your brother has built it into something real, and your little claims are only hurting everyone, including yourself. The jab landed hard because it echoed every time she had dismissed my work as secondary to the family image, and I could see my brother Tyler nodding along with that same smirk he wore when he knew he was winning. My Aunt Vivian chimed in next, her voice sharp with the same family loyalty that masked her threats. Sweetheart, we've already spoken to your research partner, Rachel, and she understands the bigger picture now. Why drag her down with you? That revelation hit like a punch because I hadn't realized how deep the pressure had gone until that moment. My cousin Marcus slid a thick folder across the coffee table, his eyes steady but cold. Sign these, and we drop everything. No more statements, no more surveillance, and the company stays intact. Refuse, and we release the full report on your past struggles. It's your choice, but we all know what's best for the family. The sarcasm dripped from every word, and I felt the weight of their united front pressing down because my mother had orchestrated it all from the start, using her influence to turn even the people I trusted against me. I asked for a moment alone in the kitchen where I called my attorney Jonathan and my mentor, Dr. Philip Grant, one last time. Dr. Grant's voice was heavy when he answered. They reached out to the university board too, Lauren. If you push, they'll pull my emeritus status. I'm sorry, but I can't testify. Jonathan confirmed the same pattern on his end, subtle calls to his firm suggesting conflicts of interest. The family's reach was everywhere, and the realization left me gripping the counter as the voices from the living room drifted, in my father finally speaking up in that quiet way that always backed my mother. She's always been the one who couldn't see the team effort. He said just loud enough for me to hear. The pain of it all built into a single clear thought. Fighting them would destroy not just me, but everyone around me. When I walked back in, my mother was waiting with that calm smile she wore like a weapon. Well, darling, we've given you every chance to come back where you belong. Her words carried the same psychological jab she had perfected over years, making me feel like the outsider who had never truly earned a place. I looked at each of them, my father's silent nod, my brother's confident stare, my aunt and cousin's expectant faces, and something inside me finally cracked under the pressure. That night, I signed the papers handing over every right to the neural program I had created, along with a non-disclosure agreement that sealed my silence forever. The relief on their faces was immediate, but the emptiness that flooded me felt heavier than any courtroom battle could have. 2 weeks later, I met Rachel at our usual coffee shop, and she looked exhausted as she hugged me tightly. They offered me a senior role if I stayed quiet, she admitted softly. I took it because I have bills too, but I hate that it came at your expense. Her words confirmed the painful choice I had made was the only one that protected the people I cared about, yet it left a regret that settled deep in my chest. I also spoke with my new colleague, Elena Vargas, at the research center, who had watched the whispers spread through our department. They made it clear your name can't be tied to any future projects here, she told me gently. I'm sorry, Lauren, this fight cost you more than you deserved. Even the private investigator I had briefly hired, Mark Riley, called to say the family's legal team had buried every lead he found. They're too connected, he said. Walking away is the smartest move, even if it doesn't feel fair. I resigned from my consulting role the following month and moved to a smaller apartment in a quieter part of Colorado Springs, taking a modest position as a data analyst at a local nonprofit where no one knew my family's name or my old work. The company gala that had started everything now ran annual events celebrating my brother's innovation, and my parents sent me the occasional polite card as if nothing had ever happened. My mother never apologized, Of course, her final message through my aunt was simply, "We're glad you finally saw reason, darling." The sarcasm still stung from afar, but I had learned the hard way that some battles only leave deeper scars when you try to win them. Looking back now, the choice I made that night in my parents' living room wasn't about victory or justice. It was about survival, even if it meant letting go of everything I had built. The family stayed exactly as strong and polished as ever, their reputation untouched, while I carried the quiet weight of what I had lost. Peace came slowly, in small moments, like morning walks, where no black SUV waited, and evenings without anonymous threats. But the regret lingered, because I knew the truth would stay buried under their version of success. Choosing myself meant walking away alone, and that isolation taught me more than any courtroom ever could. If you've ever had to sign away your own dreams just to protect the people around you and finally breathe again, drop a comment below, because I still wonder some nights if there was another way out. What would you have done when the family pressure became too heavy to fight? Thank you for listening to my story all the way through. It still hurts to tell, but sharing it feels like the first real step toward letting it go.